Good afternoon, and welcome to the 9 Dots Prize podcast. I'm Ann Applebaum. I'm one of the prize jurors, and we're here today to talk about the prize and to interview two of the previous winners. Let me just say a couple of brief words about the prize because it is an unusual one. It's a prize for creative thinking. It seeks to it looks for people who are interested in talking about contemporary social issues that are difficult to solve. The entrants into the prize are asked to respond to a question in 3,000 words. The winner receives $100,000 plus a book contract from Cambridge University Press. The aim of the prize is to promote and encourage innovative thinking to address problems that are difficult to solve. As I say, the name of the prize references the 9 dots puzzle. So it's a lateral thinking puzzle, that can only be solved by thinking outside the box. And I'm really pleased to have with us today James Williams, who was the first winner of the prize, and Annie Zaidi, who was the second winner of the prize. To those who are listening, you've all joined in listen-only mode. However, you will have the opportunity to submit text questions by typing your answers into the questions tab of the control panel. You can send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will collect them and address them during the Q&A session after we speak to the two winners. Should you experience any technical difficulties, please add this to the questions box, and a member of the organizing team who are monitoring the call will endeavor to help you. In the unlikely event that we experience any major issues, we'll message the audience and restart the webinar. So now let me begin first with introducing our two important guests. One is James Williams. He was the winner of the first prize. He's a writer and research fellow at the University of Oxford, at the Oxford Uehiro Center for Practical Ethics. James received his PhD from Oxford, where he studied at Balliol College and the Oxford Internet Institute. Previously, he worked for 10 years at Google, where he received the Founders Award, the company's highest honor, for his work on search advertising. He's also the co-founder of the Time Well Spent campaign. James's first book was a result of winning the 9 Dots Prize. The question that year that he answered was, are digital technologies making politics impossible? And the result of his answer to that question, and then the year that he spent working on the prize, was a book called Stand Out of Our Light: Freedom and Resistance in the Attention Economy. It was an unusual book. It was very successful. Among other things, the president of Princeton University selected Stand Out of Our Light in 2019 as the pre-read book. It was the book given to the entire Princeton freshman class before they arrived at all. The second winner, Annie Zaidi, is a freelance writer whose work includes reportage, essays, short stories, poetry, and plays. And Annie began her career as a reporter with stints at leading newspapers and magazines, including Midday and Frontline in India. She has published both fiction and nonfiction. Known Turf, Bantering with Bandits, and Other True Tales is a collection of essays that she wrote that were shortlisted for the Crossword Book Award in 2010. Another collection of short fiction she wrote called Love Stories, number 1 to 14, was published in 2012. In 2015, she published an anthology called Unbound: 2,000 Years of Indian Women's Writing. Zaidi currently works as a freelance writer, working on fiction, scripts, and columns for magazines and newspapers. She won the 9 Dots Prize after answering the question, is there still no place like home? And her answer to that question, and the year that she spent working on the prize, produced the winning book, Bread, Cement, and Cactus, which I happen to have here. Sadly, I left James's book in London, and in this COVID age, it's very hard to keep everything in the same place. And her book was published in May 2020, and it also combines memoir and reportage to explore concepts of home and belonging rooted in her experience of contemporary life in India. So those are the two prize winners. Just so that those listening know, the question for 2020-2021 is, what does it mean to be young in an aging world? And the deadline for this prize for submitting proposals on how to answer this prize is the 18th of January 2021. So, a couple of months from now. Let me begin with really some very prosaic questions to both of you. Let me start with James, since he's our first prize winner. Tell me what made you apply for the prize. Where did you get your inspiration from? Did you already have a book in your head on this topic before you saw the prize question? Or did the question itself inspire the book?
Sure. So I had been thinking about the issues I wrote the book about for a few years. It's kind of what led me to go to Oxford from Google and kind of do my PhD on it. And so they had been kind of in my head. And I think the prize allowed me, I think, to kind of I think of it as a branch off of the tree of the research I was doing, where I had been thinking about the question specifically in political terms, but it allowed me, I think, to pursue that that direction of it. I found out about the prize. One of my friends, who's a historian there in Oxford, Ernesto Oyarbide, had told me about the prize and encouraged me to apply for it. And so that's how I found out about it. Just his encouragement. But yeah, it was a nice opportunity to be able to refine some of my thinking in this particular direction of politics that hadn't been a core part of the thesis that I was doing at Oxford.
So the prize question actually pushed you in a slightly different direction than you might have gone. Is that fair to say?
It did, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so was the book one that you might have written anyway, or would it have been a different book, do you think?
I think components of it. There's kind of the general question about how our technology is shaping society, shaping us, our thinking, our lives. I think specifically kind of in that moment, it was in the wake of some of the political earthquakes of 2016. I think there was kind of a lot. It was a very kind of acute question as well. So I mean, I may have incorporated some of those things in the eventual book that I wrote, but I don't know if I would have gone as strongly in that direction. And I think specifically, I kind of work with kind of these issues of attention, and I think kind of connecting up the concept of attention with sort of like the idea of will, the individual will, political will. I don't know if I would have made that connection quite as strongly if I hadn't responded to the question that the prize had posed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your book was, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it was one of the first books that caught my eye. Now we all speak very normally of the attention economy and the way in which the social media companies exploit attention and seek to gather more of your attention and so on. But I think your book was the first book that I read that really pushed me in that direction. So it was obviously something you'd been thinking about or had been aware of, for a long time, and you were in an unusual position to be able to write it. Right. So Annie, well, let me ask you the same question. What made you apply for the prize? Where did you get your inspiration from? Did you have this kind of book in your head already? Or did the question that you were asked, which was, is there still no place like home? Did that somehow inspire the way you shaped your ideas?
So the question for my year, the year I submitted, certainly did push me in a new direction. I have been thinking about and around home for many years. I think even in my first sort of set of essays, I did have one section, but it's not even a full essay. It's just one section where I talk about identity and belonging and feeling conflicted about it. And part of this is because of who I am, because I come from a kind of a mixed marriage. I come from a lot of my personal history sort of is at the intersection of the history of my country, in a way, India. So I do feel that there's a lot about my life which lends itself to ambiguity, and certainly that had a lot to do with the way politics was shaping up, was also increasing that ambiguity and that sense of feeling a little bit unsure of where you belong and being made to feel that way. So that was certainly sort of in the air, but I didn't have a book in mind. Uh, there's a slight change in my bio now. I should have mentioned this before. I do now teach full time, but when I was applying for the prize, I was dependent completely on freelancing for my income, and I was always looking for things to apply for, a grant, a competition, something or the other. And one of my journalist friends sent me information about the 9 dots, saying that you should apply, because she knew that I was constantly applying for everything I possibly could apply for. I was just sending pictures out there at random and seeing what would stick, to be very honest. That was what I was doing. But this was also a question that was deeply important to me. So I spent a long time thinking about it. I spent 6 months writing that essay, just tweaking it, thinking about, gathering my thoughts around it. I didn't know that I wanted to write a memoir for sure. But once I'd finished writing the essay, I knew that I wanted to write something that was part research and part memoir. And then I put, the chapters, the construction of the book proposal came after that. I didn't really know what I was going to write until I entered the prize.
Mm-hmm. And how did the question shape? I was actually on the jury for, in the year that you won. And one of the oddities was how many different ways people interpreted the question, which I think it was imagined that the answer would involve some, arguments about identity or refugees or belonging. But many people came up with, answered it architecturally. I mean, there were questions, there were people who thought it was a question about construction and furnishings, and there was a very wide range of answers. How did the idea of "there's no place like home" affect you? What did that make you think of?
When you grow up listening to that phrase, "there's no place like home," which is meant to indicate that home is the best place there is. For me, the question was interesting because where is home? You have to answer whether it's a good place or a bad place is secondary. First, you have to answer the question of where home is. And that led me to think of various other things. I mean, if you don't actually own a physical house, the question of home becomes extremely ambiguous. If you don't have, say, money invested in it, then home is very fluid. It could be this neighborhood, it could be another city, it could be another country. That was one thing. The other thing for me was that I have always lived in the same country, right? I haven't lived in on various continents or in multiple countries. I've moved around a little bit, but within the same country. So for me, the question of belonging in another country did not arise. But when politics starts to question on the strength of where you stand on the political spectrum, if people can tell you that you don't belong here, then that is a completely different question, right? And that had started to happen over the last few years. So that really pushed me to think about home in a different way, to think of it in political ways, and about how a change in power, who is in power at the state level or at the central level, can actually make an entire community, not just mine, but at different points in history, different communities can be rendered homeless, or the feelings of home can be shaken quite dramatically because of politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. We imagine the idea of home and the concept of identity to be something solid, but actually these things are shaped by history and politics and by shifts in the ideas of people around us, and our deciding who we are can really it's not a physical attribute. It's something that's in your head, and that's what I got out of your book anyway. Why don't we talk a little bit about the sort of mechanics of this prize, since it's such an unusual one. Most book prizes are given to people after they wrote the book, and both of you got a book prize that you received before you wrote the book. And tell me, James, I'll start by asking you. And so here you were, you won unexpectedly, I assume, won the prize. How difficult was it then? I mean, you then had a year to write a book, really less than a year, because it had to be prepared for publication by a university press. How difficult was it to find the time to carve out the space? I mean, was it possible to write a book in a year? Do you wish you'd had more time? And how did it change your career? I mean, you must have had to, halt what you were doing and change plans. How did that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting prize. I mean, it's sort of almost like Obama's Nobel Prize or something like this, where you get it before you do something. But I mean, it kind of changes what the prize does as a function, right? Instead of a recognition of some action, it's essentially a kind of constraint or like a commitment device. So it's like, you can have this amount of money if you finish this by this day. So, for me, and being well, I didn't have any basis for comparison because it was my first book. But basically, like I tend to be perfectionist and kind of like, if I hadn't had some kind of deadline, I might still be writing it, who knows. So I think for me, it was very useful in that way. There were some other things in my kind of personal world. My wife and I were expecting our first child, I think a few weeks after the book was due. So yeah, I mean, the mechanics of it, like if you had a camera and you were walking around watching me write it, I mean, it wouldn't have been the most glamorous thing. It was a lot of late nights with pizza and caffeine and stuff. But I mean, I think looking back, I think I think the kind of the deadline kind of nature of the prize, and I think it sort of basically afforded me a certain kind of intensity of attention for those months. And again, I didn't know anything different, so I, maybe the next book, I guess it will feel much longer, much more kind of relaxed. But like I said, I'd had several years of thinking about the issue before, and so it was kind of like, I guess at the end of doing like a kind of a doctoral thesis, it was kind of like running a sprint at the end of running a marathon. Yeah, so there was a kind of intensity of attention, but there was also a real fulfillment when I was finished and saw the book and saw the people responding to it and everything else. So yeah, so it was I think it was a very useful structure for me for writing a first book.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Annie? What was your experience like?
So I had very confidently written my application that I'm a freelance journalist and I'm used to meeting deadlines and I can do this. But it was very difficult. Partly because the research wasn't quite done. I thought I had the research because when you say you're writing a memoir, it's your life and you think you've got the research, but I didn't really. Once I actually sat down, I thought that, I still have to research about half of it. So then I started to travel back to the places that I wanted to write about. I took a trip to each of those places one more time. I met new people. I took notes, I transcribed notes, I did interviews, I bought books, I read books, and I had to cram all of that in. Just the research part I crammed into 3 months, and then writing at breakneck speed. So it was very difficult. It was one of the hardest things I've done. Thankfully, it was a short book. It was also it was exciting, but it was difficult. I won't say that if you haven't already done the research, it is very difficult to write something within 6 months or 7 months. From the announcement to the prize to the submission of the first draft was just about 6 months.
Yeah. No, I wrote a book that was published this year that was partly a memoir as well, and I know exactly what you mean. You think it's your life, so you know it, but actually you have to go and re-interview people and ask them, I remember this, was it really like that? And then you need to reflect on it, and you need to read other people going through the same experience and so on. So I agree with you. It's surprisingly, that is a very short time. And most of my other books have been history books that required many years of research. So the idea that I could write a book in 7 months seems almost seems pretty amazing. But presumably both of you felt, I mean, what was the what drove you on? Was it the prize money? Was it just the sense that, was it the deadline? What impelled you to finish? Either one of you, James. Yep.
Yeah, I think it was all of the above. The funding, the deadline, the sense that there are a lot of eyes on this project, and I want to do well with it, and also just my own passion about the issue I was writing about and wanting to see it kind of advanced out there in the world. So I think it was a swirl of all of that all at once. Yeah.
Yes, same here. I mean, of course, the money, because you don't get it if you don't do it. That's the thing. The funding is split up into 3 parts. They don't just give it to you and say, here, take it and go. They give you an advance and you don't get the rest until you actually deliver something, which is fair enough. And I think it's a very wise way to do it, because you might write a very good 3,000-word essay, but then you may not be able to deliver on the book. So I think that's a fair way to do it. But yes, that was one thing. The other thing also for me particularly was that, I mean, this is also something, I have written books before and I have edited a book before, but I don't come from an academic background. So, and Cambridge University Press is an academic press, and there is a certain amount of academic rigor involved that I wasn't used to. As a journalist, when you're writing something, it's enough to quote someone. And if you have your notes, then that's fine. But if you're writing a book and if it's being published by an academic press, then you need the page number, you need the, it's not enough to paraphrase. If you're doing an exact quote, it needs to be exact like that. And for me, it made me do a lot of work twice, because, once it came to the edit stage, I had to go back and say, oh, but I saw this book in a library and I don't have that book anymore. And then I had to go and acquire a second copy of the book to look up the page number and the reference and to do the little stuff. And for me, it was also something that I wanted to prove to myself that I can do this. So I think there was a little bit of that driving me too.
Mm-hmm. Annie, what impact has the book had on your career? What are you working on now, and what directions did the book push you in? Did it change anything? Did the prize change anything for you?
Well, so for me, this is still fairly new. The book came out this year. Just before it came out, I had agreed to a teaching assignment. So that's what I'm doing currently. I'm teaching, and I'm also new to this. So I'm learning along the way. One thing the prize certainly has done is that it has gotten rid of a lot of my anxiety. A freelancer's life is a very, very insecure life, especially in India. It's extremely insecure. You do a lot of work for next to no money. So for me, I think that pressure just lifted this huge burden off my back. That was one thing, at least in the short term, where you're not having to negotiate every pitch and every week, moving week to week. That was a big thing. And the other thing that it has done is that it has set my mind free to think, to let my ideas breathe a little bit. If you're constantly writing for a living, one of the things it does is that you produce a lot in short bursts, but you don't have the time to think of how you can link up all your ideas, how one idea can really, for you to allow yourself to go further into your own head and say that, okay, I'm just going to sit on this idea for 2 weeks and then see what I come up with, instead of just churning out something in 2 days. And that freedom has meant a lot to me. Certainly. I've written maybe 3 articles this year, and I feel that I've written better.
Mm-hmm. What about you, James? Tell us what you're working on now, and how did the book affect what you decided next, what career choices, as they say, you made next?
Yeah, so I've kind of been sitting at this intersection, I guess, of academia and I guess maybe advocacy, for lack of a better term, on some of these kind of tech ethics issues. And I think, the book, it allowed me to sort of put out in a very kind of concise, 40,000 words, it's not that long for a book, like a very concise package, like kind of this hub, and so that I could kind of see which spokes off of that hub sort of are, where is kind of academic work the right path for advancing some of those? Where is, which of these kind of elements resonate with people in their own lives? Which of these are best, suited for advocacy kind of work, to companies or governments. So I think it let me put a lot of the components of.
Yeah, I've just lost the sound.
We lost.
James, we've lost your sound. What you just said didn't make it. Maybe you could try again, maybe without the picture.
Oh, sorry, I've just lost some sound.
Yes.
I heard the last bit of that.
I was going to say, we didn't hear your last statement. Do you think you could repeat it?
Oh, so the very last thing I said was, I think it allowed me to put the kind of a package, this narrative out there in package form, and see what resonates with different people, and what tasks are appropriate to pursue in different domains, whether that's academia or kind of public evangelism, advocacy, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And what are you working on now? What's your current project? So
there's some writing projects, kind of the next kind of a book that would follows on from the stuff that I had written about in Stand Out of Our Light. There's some other kind of advocacy work, partnerships with different sort of kind of governments, other kind of organizations. So it's really kind of a similar kind of mishmash of a lot of different things. But in my work at Oxford, my kind of academic work, one thing I'm really thinking about a lot and working on is how do we think better and more specifically about sort of the varieties of influence. One of the things I talked a little bit about in the book is how we have these terms like persuasion or coercion, or now in the context of technology, things like manipulation or interference. And how is there a way we can better map this out so that we can, I think, have more I guess, like richer conversations about that kind of thing. So I think that's one thing. And then I think just how do we move forward in terms of kind of the design of all of this? Where are those points in the whole system of digital technology, the attention economy? Where are we best suited to kind of intervene and shift the whole system? So those are some of the things that I've been thinking about lately. But it's a large issue, so there are a lot of different angles into it.
Have you been part of the bigger conversation about how to regulate the internet, social media, how to reform the platforms? Is that part of what you're doing now?
To some extent. I haven't been as much of a part of the conversations in the U.S., but I know that some of those hearings have been happening lately. So yeah, it's something that I'm involved in from time to time. But
interesting. Let me ask another kind of question. Namely, so a lot of people listening to this call, and a lot of the people who will watch this conversation, are people who are interested in applying for this prize. And since you two are the really only experts in this question, can I ask you what advice you have for people who want to do it? Annie, why don't we start with you?
First, I would suggest don't apply if you don't really have any thoughts on it, and if you don't have a genuine feeling for the topic. I think this year's topic is actually fairly broad, and a lot of people may be able to respond to it, coming at it from all kinds of angles. But if you have a strong feeling about something, first write down a broad plan. Before the essay, come up with what you actually want to say. So maybe a chapter list will help. A chapter list, if it does nothing else, it will at least tell you whether you have a book or not, whether your ideas are book length. because I think that makes a difference. You can write maybe 5,000 good words, but can you write 40,000 good words is also something to consider. And I think the other thing is edit a lot. I think, like they say, good writing, for the essay, good writing is rewriting. So with my submission, for example, I broadly had the essay that I was going to submit for a month, but I spent about 3 weeks just editing it. It's 3,000 words. My submission was 2,999 words. I was really afraid that if I wrote 2 extra words, they'd disqualify me. So I just kept thinking that, okay, how can I get this down to just exactly 3,000 or 2,999? And I spent hours staring at the screen, editing one word out, editing one word in. This is typical writer stuff. This is just what writers do. You obsess over commas, but I really did obsess over commas. I think, I mean, coming at it from a writer's perspective, a good submission is basically just really careful writing. You place a good comma, it makes the difference between a piece being really good and being like super good. So I would just say pay attention to that essay. Don't submit at the last minute. Don't leave it for that, screeching into the deadline sort of thing. Just write it, let it breathe, edit it, proofread it, that kind of thing.
James, what's your advice? You wrote a very different kind of book, and you're a different kind of writer from Annie. So is your advice different?
Yeah, I mean, Annie, your point about the word count, it definitely resonates with me. I mean, to me, I agonized over it to the point where I was like looking at how different word processing software, like what counts as a word and how it rolls it up if it gives different numbers. Because I was like, yeah. But no, I mean, I think like at a kind of meta level, I think one of the challenges with giving advice for a competition like this is by its nature, it's looking for things that are kind of sort of orthogonal to everything else. And so I mean, I guess I can just be I don't want to be too prescriptive. I can be descriptive about what I did and how I approached it. I mean, I think the essay part of the response, I think it's an opportunity to sort of show what is the kind of the core idea, the thing that's new, that's kind of that would be the basis of it all. But I think it's also an opportunity to give sort of an experiential preview to the judges of here's what it would feel like to read the the book. And so I mean there were certain things. I mean, yeah, mine was very different from Annie's, just in terms of the kind of the nature of the writing. So I mean, for me, it was like thinking about like how the judges will go through the process. So there'll be the first stage will be like there'll be reading hundreds of these, and so something that it kind of is like very, for me it was very clear at the top that was kind of maybe a paragraph of sort of the best core kind of expression of the overall narrative of things, and then a kind of unpacking and the rest of the essay. I think another thing that I think is interesting is like in a normal research kind of context, it's about most of the writing is about showing that you've kind of done the due diligence and understand what other people are saying in this domain. And I almost feel like it's and you kind of suggest something new maybe. Whereas I feel like here it's almost reverse. It's almost like it was kind of like I kind of suggest that and then show, okay, I know what's going on in this domain, kind of, but the core of it is kind of like here's sort of what's new. And I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give is, at least based on the way I did it, is I think it was just as important what I didn't say as what I did say, because I think for a lot of these issues that are so important to society, there are a lot of people talking about them. There are sort of these received narratives out there. So for instance, in the context of digital technology, when I was writing, everybody was talking about fake news. Everybody was talking about, this kind of stuff. And so I think, if you think from a judge's point of view, there's going to be, okay, a lot of these with similar kinds of things that are popped up where people might say, I need to put that in order to show people that show them that I know what's going on. Whereas, I mean, I actually deliberately left, like I had a list of things that I was like, I'm going to leave these things out, just to make it perceptually kind of unique in the eyes of the judges. So those are just a few things that I think kind of relate to the way that I approached it. I kind of thought of it as like, it's sort of as like if the whole book is like an iceberg, you want to just sort of be able to sort of show the tip of the iceberg, and show it in a way where they can see, okay, this is interesting, and there's a whole iceberg below it.
And it's interesting. Did you think, I'll ask this of Annie too, but let me ask you first while we're speaking. Did you think about what the judges would know and what their reaction would be? I mean, you just said something almost like that. Everybody's talking about fake news, so I need to make sure they understand that this is something slightly different. Did you try and think, from the perspective of the judges, how they might read the application essay?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just one of the things I did was kind of maybe chunked the essay into smaller sections than I might have otherwise, where there can be maybe more bite-sized pieces. Again, this is just what I did. It's not necessarily advice, but I mean, and I did look at, who the judges were. I mean, I didn't go too crazy with this, but I mean, looked at who they were, what they studied, what their fields were, because I think one of the interesting things is it's a very interdisciplinary, diverse judging panel. And so, if in a way, kind of you're writing for them, I think it's worth looking at, yeah, what might resonate with them. So I think that's something that I did a little bit, yeah.
What about you, Annie? Did you think about that? And actually, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you think about audiences more generally. I mean, there's an audience for the application essay, and then there's an audience for your book, right? So how do you think about audiences when you write? I know I do all the time, think about who's going to be reading this and what they'll know, but what's your experience?
Yeah, so mine is the completely opposite experience to James. I didn't look at the judges at all. I don't think I even bothered to figure out whether I could look at whether the judges were there or whether the jury was not going to be revealed or anything. I think I would have been too intimidated to even apply if I had looked at the judges list. I looked at it later and I was like, oh, if I knew it was all these professors, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have dared to pitch a memoir, certainly. I think I would have been too intimidated. I think this is the odd thing about me and my writing. I do write for a living. I have written for a living most of my life, but I tend not to think of who's going to be reading it. When I'm writing it, I kind of some shutter comes down in the head, and then I'm writing just for me. So I think my submission was written mainly for me. I am my own primary audience. When it came to the book proposal, then yes, then I did think a little bit, and I think then I was thinking of the people who might read it, but I was then thinking of the lay readership. I knew that the book was available as a free download for everyone. I had read James's book that way, which I really liked, by the way. So I knew that it was targeted at everybody. It wasn't going to be a specialist kind of for the book, at least. So I did think of how to prepare to write a book that everybody anywhere in the world can access, regardless of their level of education or regardless of their own personal interests. And I did then try and make it not too to not just make it about me, because it was a memoir, but I was also very conscious of how it had to still try and answer the question. I couldn't just write about the city I was born in, for example, without it also being meaningful to everybody else who is not born in that city. So I was very conscious then of that, of the social relevance and the topicality of what I was writing.
Okay, so in a minute, the administrator of the prize is going to come on and take some questions from the live audience. But before she does that, this is Jane Tinkler, who's just rejoined us. Let me just ask you both one final question, which is, do you think you would have written these books anyway? Were they in your head? Would you have eventually come up with something similar, if you hadn't had this chunk of money and the promise of a publisher? I don't know, James.
I think I wouldn't have written this exact book. I think maybe something similar, but probably not at that same time, which I think there was a timeliness to my book, given everything that was happening. And I think, yeah, I think I would have written something, but probably not as concise and not as timely.
Good. And Annie?
I think not this book. I would have possibly written the first chapter, but I was considering writing that as fiction. So maybe that would have turned into a whole different book. And there are bits and pieces of it that I would have maybe expanded into essays here and there, but definitely not the shape and form it is in now. It wouldn't have happened.
Right. So these are, in other words, we now have two books. One excellent book about the role that attention plays in the modern economy, and the other a memoir of belonging and dislocation and identity that we wouldn't have if it wasn't for the 9 Dots Prize. And they were both, you know, they were both turned out to be excellent books that hit exactly the right cultural moment, I think. So well done to the prize for organizing it. Now this is, we're now bringing on the administrator of the prize who's going to coordinate the last part of this conversation, which will include questions from those who are watching. And then I suppose anybody who has questions about the prize itself can also ask. So thank you very much. Really a pleasure to meet in real life, both of you. I've really enjoyed both of your books, and congratulations to both of you again. Thank you.
Thanks, you, Anne.
Thanks so much. Anne unfortunately has to leave us when you've just written a book about the Republicans and Trump. This is quite a busy time for you. So thank you so much, Anne, for sparing us the time. But yes, I'm Jane Sinclair. I'm the Senior Manager for the prize, and I've been tracking all of your questions as they've been coming in during the course of the session. We've had loads, so we're not going to be able to get through all of them, but I think some of them definitely have been answered during the course of the discussion. But I wanted to just sort of group them, I guess, so that we can put them to James and Annie. So James and Annie, a lot of the questions have been about the sort of putting together of the proposal. So the real sort of getting to this 3,000 words. You talked a little bit about it during the session, but a lot of the questions are about the balance. So how do you get the balance right of the bits of writing, your ideas that you want to cover, sort of the evidence and the research that we ask to be part of each of these responses, and maybe a sort of personal element. Annie's obviously is based quite a lot on her personal experience. James, maybe yours not quite so much. So how did you try and strike a balance across all of those different things that you thought needed to be included in the 3,000 words? Annie, should we start with you? Because as I say, there's this sort of stronger personal element in yours. How did you try and think about the balance across the 3,000 words?
Yeah, so I just made really sure that the 3,000 word essay has to work on its own. It has to stand on the strength of its own writing, information, everything you want to pack in. You can't assume that the jury, who are your first readers really, that they will want to read another word outside of those 3,000 words. So that I made very sure of, that everything in those 3,000 words you have to imagine that you're writing just this and nothing else. If you're writing just this, is it still good reading, and does it still make a point? So I think I put in just enough into those 3,000 words that broadly covers what I wanted it to cover. So it covers identity, it covers physical space, it covers a certain spiritual element of life and death. So for example, life itself and the other world, so to speak, is a part of my book, and I hint at it at least. In fact, I begin with it and then I come round to the more physical and the political. So I included at least 4 of the things that are ultimately in the book proposal as a chapter kind of division. At least 4 of those themes were hinted upon within the body of the essay, but the essay itself needed to be a self-contained piece of writing. That was how I approached it.
Thank you. And James?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Annie. I mean, it needs to kind of be something that completes a full motion on its own as a essay. And I think also, I mean, it's sort of hard to generalize about kind of things about like, the balance of one thing or another, because I know that, it's a great, a trait that I think the prize has is that there's so many potential responses to the question. I mean, the way I think about it generally is like, there's kind of a core narrative that that the book would have, and so then and if you can have that essentially sort of a microcosm of that core narrative in the essay, then where you put in, if you have sort of the skeleton of it, then your own, where evidence comes in, where your own experience comes in. I mean, it depends on what that narrative is, and so I think, without that, getting that core narrative, I think then it's hard to really answer those questions. But if you have that core narrative, then I think my feeling is a lot of those elements, then they fall into place a lot easier.
I mean, people were really interested in, I guess, what to put in and what to leave out. I mean, if you had to write that 3,000 words now, do you think it would include different things? It would have left out some of the things that you put in? I guess, sort of narrowing down what you put in and what you leave out. A number of the questions were around that. Annie, what would you think?
No, I actually expanded. When I came up with my book proposal, I thought I would write about, these 4 things or these 5 things. But when I actually got down to the research and writing, I found that there were these 2 additional themes which just came up, and I knew that they were vital to the book. So instead of narrowing it down, I actually expanded it. And as you know, I went a little bit over the word limit, not too much, but a little bit. And if I'd had my way, I could very easily write another 40,000 words on the same topic actually now, but I'm not going to do it, but I could do it. So I think once your mind starts to work in a certain direction, then you see, oh, there's this also and this also, and there are all these different ways of thinking about this. So for me, that part of it came later. It didn't come before the application, because I really seriously started reading around the topic in the course of doing it.
That's great. And James, what would you think?
I mean, when I wrote the essay, the response essay, I mean, I had 6,000 words, so double the word limit, and I thought there's absolutely no way I can cut this down anymore. Like, I would be losing something essential. And I mean, part of that is the verbal, just compressing the verbal economy of it all down. But yeah, there were things I thought were essential that I had to take out of it. I mean, one thing that is useful, I have a friend read through it and see, when somebody reads through it once or twice, what do they take away from it? Because I mean, I just think it's already this enormous task of compression. At least for me, it was. And even if somebody reads through it 10 times, there might be, something you might think is essential. It might not be one of the main things they come away with. Again, I think it's just getting back to like that core narrative. What is essential for that core narrative? But yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to kind of, cut stuff out that you think is essential. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, darling.
Yeah. I mean, this sort of maybe a sort of final question. Obviously, our applicants are going to be writing their applications during the time of COVID, and definitely it was something in the judges' minds when they set this question. They didn't want to directly ask a question about COVID, but I think this question has echoes of some of the issues that have been raised by responses in particular countries to the COVID. So one of the questions came in about trying to sort of keep being creative during lockdown or restricted movements. Where do you find your inspiration and creativity at this point. I mean, if you'd been writing this book, these books that you wrote now, how do you think you would have handled that? What do you think would have been different? Annie, maybe we could start with you.
Well, deadlines are a great inspiration, I find. Even when I don't want to do something, you set me a deadline, I limp my way, crawl my way to it, but I'll probably meet it. Well, one thing I can say is turn off the internet, turn off Wi-Fi. I think, and most certainly turn off social media. You turn off one app, it saves 2 hours in the day. You turn off 3 apps, it saves 8 hours in the day. Inspiration just comes in and fills the room once you turn off social media.
Do you think it would make you look at the question a bit differently?
This year's question, I think I already, I mean, if I was to enter it again, I already have a lot to say about it, I think, regardless of COVID, because the question was pertinent even before, I think, and it is pertinent in small ways and intimate ways and in very big ways also, I think. So I don't think COVID would have changed my response, but it might change responses for other people, you know, depending on where they are and who they are.
James, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are, if somebody wants to write in the direction of the COVID issue on this topic, I mean, there are thematic and topical things that one could get inspiration from there. But I mean, I guess just in this general environment that we're in, you know, I mean, I think there's a way in which, you know, people's experiences, you know, during this year have been very different on a lot of different axes. But I mean, there's some ways in which they've been really similar, and I think one of those ways is that we're all essentially trying to cram our lives through these little screens, right? And so if you think about like a prize that is saying we're looking for something that is orthogonal to how everybody else is thinking, and everybody is cramming their lives through these little screens, it would seem reasonable then to sort of kind of, you know, go look somewhere else to the extent one can. I mean, we know that, you know, that we have these kind of information foraging pathways, which is actually, it's interesting, it's the same kind of, you know, neuroscientific basis as like kind of food foraging pathways. But I mean, like a lot of people are kind of on these, probably even more, you know, these information foraging pathways are probably more homogenous than they were pre-COVID. So I think, I mean, some ways it makes it easier, in some ways it makes it harder. And then, you know, we're limited in the degree to which we can go outside of this stuff, either physically or, you know, metaphorically. So I don't know. I think that, yeah, social media, like, just, I don't know, getting away from, just think like, what are my sort of, what would be my usual information foraging pathway, and what are other people's usual information foraging pathways, and what are some that are, you know, what are some trails that nobody's kind of walking on? And I kind of look for those, but what that is going to be different for every person and every question. So it's hard to really generalize about it.
Well, I guess just to finish, I mean, you've both quite rightly said, you know, I don't want to give advice necessarily, but do you have any words of encouragement for those who are considering applying for the prize? They've still got a good couple of months till our deadline on the 18th of January. So I'm not going to ask for words of wisdom necessarily, but do you have some words of encouragement for to end on today for our applicants? Annie, maybe if we start with you.
Yeah, I would say apply, just apply. I mean, I'm saying this just as a person who applies a lot to everything and gets rejected a lot. I get accepted for one thing after 6 rejections, and that's okay. You just keep going, so apply. Even if you're not a young person, apply. If you're an old person, apply. You know, just because the topic says, what does it mean to be young, doesn't mean you have to be young. We were all young once. So yeah, just apply.
Brilliant, thank you. James?
Yeah, I think I would have the same advice. I mean, I was nudged by a friend to apply, so I'm now passing that nudge on to all of you. And because I think even if you might not think that it might have a chance. I mean, part of the interesting about this prize is just its unexpectedness is kind of it's just part of what is being looked for. So I would say just apply and yeah, because you never know. So
brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you both for your time. One of the benefits, there's not benefits of COVID, but one thing is James is in Moscow today, Annie's in India, Anne was in Poland, I'm in London. So these things are possible in a way that maybe they would have seemed too difficult before. So thank you both very much for your time. And for all those listening, we have a number of sort of helpful things, we hope, on the website. So there are podcasts, there are little videos about the support that's available for the winner, things to think about in your application. If any of your questions, and I'm really sorry we didn't get a chance to talk to all of the questions, but if you think something wasn't answered, please do email us. It's questions@9dotsprize.org. Please drop us a line and we'll make sure to get back to you. This event has been recorded and the recording will be emailed out to you all over the next few days. But for now, thank you, James, thank you, Annie, thanks, Anne, and thank you all very much for attending. We're really grateful for you giving up your time for this event, and we wish you lots of luck. Both we wish James and Annie lots of luck, but we wish all of you considering applying for the prize lots of luck too. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane.
thank you.